what has everyone else said about this subject? And I repeated some of that. It's a new insight that no one else has had, but has foundations that are authentic or legitimate or objectively true. Am I making a false assumption? Am I making an assumption that someone else is already shown to be false? All of this goes on the frontier of science. But one of the things that I'm delighted when I see people with active minds trying to tackle the great unknowns of the universe. It's a beautiful thing that people want to participate on this frontier. What can you think is, if you're a fan of a subject, let's say, a hobbyist, it's called, it's possible to know enough about that subject to think you're right, but not enough about that subject to know that you're wrong. And so there's this sort of valley between that, a valley of false confidence. This has been studied by others, and it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's a phenomenon where a little bit of knowledge, you over-assess how much of that subject you actually know. And then you learn even more, and you realize, no, I didn't know as much as I thought I did. And then there's a sort of a lull there. And then when you learn even more, you come back up. Ultimately, learning enough to know whether you're right or wrong. To become an expert means you spend all this time. It doesn't happen overnight. You can't just sit in an armchair and say, I'm not an expert. It requires years and years of study, especially looking through journals where new ideas are published and contested. That's what we have learned is the most effective means of establishing that which is objectively true, or determining that which is objectively false. Both of those work hand in hand to move the needle on our understanding of the universe. I'm going to read you just my opening line. It's titled 1 times 1 equals 2. So I lead off by saying, this is an ambitious work that is a clear indication of a restless, active mind. Within these pages, however, there are many assumptions and statements that are underpinned, misinformed, or simply false, thereby compromising or nullifying many of the subsequent conclusions you have drawn. That's exactly what should happen in a peer review, out of respect for one another's people. It opens with a quote. It can never occur that the square root of a given number, when added to itself, is greater than the initial number squared, for that would expose a loose thread within the fabric of our understanding, a loose thread capable of unraveling the very ground rules of mathematics. That's a bold statement. So then I just said, this opening thesis is false. There are plenty of examples of this that have escaped your attention. This statement is shown to be false for every number that's less than 1 and greater than 0. For example, the square root of 0.64 is 0.8. 0.8 is bigger than 0.64, and it's a larger number than the original. And 0.64 squared equals 0.4096, a smaller number than the original. To the extent that the next 35 pages depends on your stated thesis. This fact undermines your claims and assumptions and conclusions. It's not about feelings, it's about objective reality. So at the time, I considered Terence a strong acquaintance, and we hung out a bit and had much exchange. We haven't spoken much since then. But go to page 2, and in here, he mentions people who he declares were persecuted because their vision exceeded the myopic view of their contemporaries. And he mentions Walter Russell, Nikola Tesla, John Keeley, and many, many more. Regarding your list of people who have made brave sacrifices, I note that to be a genius is to be misunderstood, but to be misunderstood is not to be a genius. The work of Russell, Walter Russell, has eluded any experimental support, and the work of Keeley is generally not reproducible. Science is about reproducibility. I can have the most brilliant, crazy, fun idea ever, and if I perform an experiment and no one else can duplicate that experiment, it belongs in the trash heap. It's me in my own world, thinking I have landed on an objective truth, when in fact I haven't. That's how science works, the reproducibility of results. As for the work of Tesla, much of it had very real value to physics and our understanding of electromagnetism, and that value is really recognized by my community. In the naming of a unit of electromagnetism, Patrick, you can't get more badass than having a unit named after you. Newton has a unit named after him, for example, the metric unit of force, the Newton. Much of the rest of his work was fringe and unrealized, either for violating known laws of physics or for being simply impractical. Just because you do some good stuff doesn't mean everything you ever did is going to be great. I would further affirm that just because an idea sounds good doesn't make it wrong. The system of research and publications in peer-reviewed journals has the capacity to spot crazy but true ideas, provided they're supported by compelling arguments, and ultimately supported by experiments and observation. Newton's laws, Einstein's relativity, quantum physics, are all revolutionary ideas that appeared in peer-reviewed settings or journals. Meanwhile, most of the work of Russell and Keeley had no such success with their ideas. So I think on Rogan, Karen said that I crashed those three researchers.
Talk that I read it, that I talked about Walter Russell and Victor Stauber and John Keeley as Tesla as the people that I looked up to. So I think I should on Roger Tesla stuff work. That Tesla was never really respected and
well, just simply stating the fact. I don't think of it as crafting. I think of it as being honest. I mean, I could have softened it, but I don't think that's what people who care about you should do. People who care will be honest with you about ideas, about thoughts. The world is changing so quickly, and so is everything around us. Unfortunately, we have chosen to remain faithful to antiquated and obsolete beliefs. We have put an enormous amount of faith into the methods and practices of old that are as dead today as the men who propagated the notion that the world was flat. So I say to you, regarding your world was flat reference, it's not widely appreciated, but the idea of a flat earth predates the introduction and development of the methods and tools of science as we practice them today. Those processes date back to around 1600, coincident with the invention of the microscope and telescope. Before then, truths were whatever seemed right to the senses. Afterwards, and to this day, truth was whatever the verified data obtained by your instruments forced you to believe if your senses otherwise contradicted the data. This fact means that there's no such misunderstanding on the scale of the flat earth in the era of modern science. And in multiple places throughout the treatise, he's attaching a number to a physical idea or a physical object. That idea goes way back, by the way. Go back to Pythagoras, famous for the Pythagorean theorem, which we all learned in 8th grade, wasn't it, or 9th grade? Pythagoras was also a philosopher who tried to understand how things worked. He felt, among others in his group, that if you assign a number to something, the number can imbue that object with certain meaning and significance, which means that if you manipulate the numbers, that you gain insight into the objects themselves once you've assigned a number to it. There's a lot of that permeates this document, but it's a long disproven approach to the world. Again, there's nothing wrong with a failed idea. Now other people know to not do it, right? That has value. If we place a candle in front of a mirror, the measurement of light is doubled, is it not? It does not measure as only one light source. We actually see two lights. A light meter will show twice the intensity of light. This is false.
he attacked it so with such vitriol.
Maybe that's been too blunt. What else should I say? I'm a scientist. That's what I would tell a colleague. A colleague would then say, well, thank you, and then we go out for a beer after, because that's how that works. And there's an old saying, I first heard it from Michael Dell at Dell Technologies. If one day you find yourself the smartest person in the room, change rooms. I say this is false. The light in the mirror appears dimmer than the source of light itself, for several reasons. Starting with the fact that no mirror is 100% reflective. But more importantly, the candle in the mirror is always farther away from you than the candle itself. So the light meter will always read less than twice the actual value of the candle itself. I will note that from this work, Terence produces art, sculptural art, which I find to be intriguing, even beautiful. To be more intriguing than beautiful, because you got to look at it and keep looking at it. What is that? What's going on there? I just want to read you my ending comments here. I could not follow the reasoning on these last few pages, but the illustrations that derive from them are beautiful, regardless of how they were derived. My notes have been strongly critical of your reasoning and conclusion. I was candid and blunt out of respect for the energy you have clearly invested in this work. But if you're sure that you are still right and that I have completely misunderstood your thesis, then you will need to look for another person to evaluate what you have done and solicit their comments. In any case, like I say above, the images and illustrations in your final pages are beautiful works of art, unlike any I have seen. Best to you, Neil. So, in case people wanted to know what actually went down 8 years ago, just always be cautious of the Dunning-Kruger effect. You put in a little bit of work and you have an idea, and then you think your idea is right, and that Einstein is wrong, and Newton is wrong, and that everybody's wrong, and that all of modern astrophysicists are wrong. That's bold. That's bold. Audacious. Bodacious. When continental drift was proposed, it was like, what? Land masses are moving on Earth's surface? That's a weird idea. That's going to be a hard sell. You think there's sort of swelling of the gas locally, but ultimately that's crazy. It would take a few decades until ultimately, when we're mapping the bottom of the ocean, we find that there's a mid-Atlantic ridge that the ridges are separated. Bada bing. So the resistance to jumping on the idea that continents move was not because people were stubborn. It was because people are cautious. Any new idea needs to be put through the ringer. That's how science works. You put it through the ringer. Every possible test you can. Not just because it happens to look like South America fits with Africa. Any better evidence than that? Oh, wait a minute. Fossils match between the west coast of South America and the east coast of Africa. Not recent fossils, fossils from millions of years ago. That's interesting. Things that make you go, that brought some more people over to the picture. You keep that up, and you reach a point where enough evidence is brought to bear on the question, and then you have a new emerging truth. Right? That's the vibrant energy that goes on in conferences in the context of ideas. That's how we roll. That's how it works. When Einstein came out with relativity, saying space-time curves, wow, what are you saying? What are you doing? Well, you can test it. The total solar eclipse. So the idea comes out in 1915. It's published in 1916, 1919. We measure the light around the edge of a total solar eclipse because you can't see the stars during the daytime. You see the light and light rays bent from their actual coordinate positions on the sky. Sir Arthur Eddington, an astrophysicist, provided the first experimental evidence for Einstein's general theory of relativity, which, by the way, was published in a peer-reviewed journal. Crazy idea. The platform to be accepted for the ideas is not social media. It is not Joe Rogan. It is not my podcast. It is research journals where attention can be given on a level that at the end of the day offers no higher respect for your energy and intellect than by declaring that what's in I wanted to put this on the website and see my conversation with Speedies, but you got the sense of it. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Neil deGrasse Tyson here. As always.
Stuff, Jordan. Just let's
Hey everyone, if you haven't heard yet, Tim Tower recently went back to the Joe Rogan's podcast. This time he was joined by Eric Weinstein, who was brought on to discuss his ideas. What resulted was 4 hours of comedy gold, so let's go through for some highlights, shall we? Now, Eric and his brother Brett are famous for being charlatans as well, so much so that they each deserve an episode unto themselves, but that will have to wait for another day. Here, I'm just going to highlight some idiotic things that Terry says and point out how Eric, for the most part, fails to explain precisely how idiotic they are in a way that the audience can understand. He does try to make it clear that most of what Terry says is wrong, it's simply that he remains unreasonably charitable because he places a higher premium on attracting credulous viewers to his own following than offering a mirthful excuse. That Joe decided on Eric to fact-check Terry is just another in a long string of disappointments, so I suppose we should stop being surprised at this point. But it really is sad that he couldn't ask some well-spoken mathematics or chemistry graduate student instead of continuing the platform discussion, such as what? Let's get into the tapes.
What out of the podcast, like the tangents, stood out to you, something that you wanted to? Well, what I thought is, I gotta be honest, after listening, I was not so happy with the podcast. Then I started hearing the response. I was much more infuriated by the response than the podcast. Use the position of creating formal education of the
This will set the tone for the conversation. That Eric is more offended by educated people correcting the insane gibberish that Terry spews than the actual insane gibberish that Terry spews tells you everything you need to know about who Eric is and his motivations for appearing on this program.
But they got upset that I'm talking about the foundational problems associated with mathematics that Terry discussed.
It's a personal instead of one it costs the whole thing. It's like either you're correct or you're incorrect. Tell me what you think is right.
And of course, all of these claims pretend the people who have been debunking Terry are just shouting insults and nothing else, instead of specifically explaining how all of his ideas are objectively wrong using different calculators. This is textbook denial, basically an attack. The well-deserved insults follow the debunking for replacing.
I want to offer it to you. I want to be able to show you the things that I tried to show near the that he would not even really take a look at.
You did take a look at it, right? He responded in a long video recently.
Yeah, but his response was disingenuous.
No, his response was not disingenuous. It was the most genuine, flattering, and diplomatic response imaginable to the flaming crazy and cruel. And denial, the only part of the facts. But we will come back to Neil a bit later.
I was really
There's just certain things that's a metaphor for challenging.
Oh, it was just a metaphor, you guys. After having thousands of people understanding something about arithmetic, he's decided that he wasn't serious at all. He was just speaking for you. But really, though, it's like the centerpiece of all his bullshit.
Despite the fact that the square root of 2 has all of its issues, use it or you multiply it by 2, it creates a contradiction. Despite the fact that the square root of 2 has a problem with the prime numbers, the fact that they call number 2 a prime number, when it's clearly a composite.
And of course, he immediately explains that it wasn't a metaphor at all, he just can't do basic math. No, Terry, 2 is a prime number because it's a number that is only divisible by 1 and itself. How would it be a composite number? What are its factors? 1 and itself? Yeah, that's the definition of a prime number. Off to a bad start.
Actually, it does belong as a prime, but it is also special. And in other words, I have the opportunity to strawman if I want to. It's exactly crazy.
What Terry said was objectively crazy, and Eric should be telling him that he's clueless. There is no straw man. Terry is pretending that 2 isn't a prime number, and it objectively is. Eric, at the very least, confirms that 2 is a prime number. There's nothing special about it other than that it is a very small positive integer. It's not large enough to have factors other than 1 in itself. Same with 3. Only once we get to 4 do we have a number that's large enough to have a factor other than 1 in itself. It's not that hard to understand.
You know, if you say 1 times 1 equals 2, everybody knows that that's crazy. But what you actually may mean, and what the fact that you don't use certain terms, or the fact that you use certain pronunciations that communicate to me something very positive, which is that you taught yourself. You learned stuff from reading about it. If nobody taught you, you wouldn't pronounce certain words the way you pronounce them.
Eric is saying that 1 times 1 equals 2 is crazy. He is saying that Terry can't even pronounce the words he uses. So why are we having such a hard time admitting the bottom line here? That Terry is crazy and has no clue what he's talking about.
Marie von Franz, who argued about the problems associated with the identity principle. You got Kurt Godel, who talked about it. You got Wells. All of them said it made everything incommensurable, just because they gave that identity principle to the number 1. And that has been the stumbling block for mathematicians, because it's what's held everybody behind. That they keep trying to make that work. Am I wrong?
Yeah, you're wrong if you do it that way. I mean, in other words, I can take...
Is anything that he's saying correct?
Terrence has several influences, which, again, I don't think it's clear to me.
This is why Eric does not belong here. I will give Joe credit for asking point blank whether anything Terry says is correct. He genuinely wants to know. The answer is no. He has no clue what he's talking about and just spews word salad that doesn't mean anything. Terry has no clue what Gödel did or any other mathematician or what any principle means. The person in Eric's position is supposed to say no. Nothing he says is correct. End of story. But he doesn't do that. He feigns charitability to gain fans.
I don't have an issue with multiplication either.
Well, then 1 times 1 is what?
1 times 1 should equal 2. And action times an action. If you can show me one place in the universe.
You just shifted.
No. Show me one place in the universe, one natural observable phenomenon where 1 times 1 equals 1, where action times an action doesn't have a reaction.
So then you just went into there's a concept called logomachy, which is arguing over words.
This is about as good as it gets here. Eric is pushing back on 1 times 1 equals 2, and he is accurately asserting that Terry is playing word games. But Terry needs to be aggressively shown how he is wrong, and it needs to happen in a way that everyone listening can easily follow. 1 times 1 means 1 group of 1. 3 bowls times 2 coins per bowl equals 6 coins. 2 bowls times 2 coins per bowl equals 4 coins. 2 bowls times 1 coin per bowl equals 2 coins. 1 bowl times 1 coin per bowl equals 1 coin. That's what 1 times 1 means. 1 group of 1, therefore 1. Terry already pretended he had been speaking metaphorically, but now he's going back to defending his inability to do basic arithmetic. It's beyond pathetic, and he should be publicly humiliated for insisting on this idiocy over and over again. Eric gives a lengthy monologue about how one such arithmetic contradiction would ruin all of math, but he doesn't assert that this is how we know Terry is wrong. Terry has no ability to even make a coherent comment.
Some forklift guy hits some strut, and the entire warehouse goes... That's what you're dealing with the principle of explosion.
And that's the problem with the identity principle that they've been trying to work on for years. For years, Norman J. Wildberg talks about it. It is because you have to cancel conservation of energy, and you have to cancel the action and reactionary laws.
This is a pattern. Terry knows he has no clue what he's talking about. So what does he do? He drops a name. Norman J. Wildberger. Who is that? What does he say? What did he do? No attempt to elaborate. It's just a name drop to pretend he's part of a grander discourse. He isn't. Then, of course, he deflects to concepts in physics like conservation of energy, which are not relevant whatsoever to the pure math he's trying to discuss. This is all he can do to deflect from his terrible math.
Dollar times dollar That was a
That's the
problem that
Dewey
people.
Decimal System.
Not
That's the
the Dewey
problem with
Decimal.
no. The problem comes up with the Dewey Decimal System. Why a dollar times a dollar can be different values based on different currencies. That was the point of that. I was pointing out, hey, the Dewey Decimal System is whack.
Terrence makes a correct point. If you say 1 times 1 equals 1, but if you say a dollar times a dollar, it's not a sensible thing unless a dollar squared is a unit that you can interpret.
The Dewey Decimal System, everybody. The method of classification used at the library. Terry is trying to discuss decimal points in arithmetic, and he calls it the Dewey Decimal System. What more evidence do you need that Terry just repeats random terminology he's heard with no clue what it means? Why is nobody mocking him for saying Dewey Decimal System? Eric skips right over that and correctly explains that a dollar times a dollar would be a dollar squared, which is meaningless. So when Terry tries to use that as an example, he sounds like an idiot. But we never get the payoff, which should be Terry admitting that he doesn't understand basic math. Now on to the flower of life.
People always say as above, so below, but what if you said as below, so above, and you imagine that there was a three-dimensional structure floating above this that actually projects down to this and distorts down to this? So that's the first idea. First idea is it's not this, it's the thing that projected to this. That's what you mean when you say opening the flower.
This is one reasonable steel man that Eric provides, since opening up the flower of life doesn't mean anything. But what Eric said does mean something. The idea that this shape could be something sort of like a two-dimensional shadow of a three-dimensional object or set of objects. Let's see if Terry is smart enough to accept this much better articulation of his insanity.
Because the flower, when I was researching where the Platonic solids came from, this is the oldest version that I got from all of antiquity. It came back to them.
Well, there are no Platonic solids because you're in dimension 2, except for what you built, which is the thing above in black.
And of course, he fumbles it immediately, dragging us all back to his Platonic solids, which Eric points out are certainly not present in this image, since those are three-dimensional objects.
But what they did years ago, 6,000 years ago, was draw straight lines where the circles overlapped. And I thought, in what I was reasoning with regard to all energy being expressed in motion, all motion being expressed in waves, all waves being curved, and that there were no straight lines in the universe. So
there's several errors in what you just said.
Terry begins to malfunction when he isn't allowed to spew his well-rehearsed script. It's right back to his word salad about energy and motion and waves. Eric doesn't like it.
I stopped there.
Yeah, but you should correct those errors while we're there.
Okay. It is not true that all energy is expressed in motion.
what energy is not expressed in motion?
Potential energy is not expressed in motion. If I have a weight on a spring, which is sort of the quintessential, people don't know this, but most of physics comes out of the system represented by a weight on a spring.
Mm-hmm.
Potential energy, the energy of position, not motion. I wonder, has anyone else brought that up? Whatever he could mean by that, he's wrong. For example, potential energy is the energy held by an object by virtue of its position in a field, like a gravitational or electromagnetic field. No motion, yet energy. Eric elaborates somewhat excessively, and then Terry desperately tries to come off like he has any ability to discuss basic physics.
Because all of the energy is in the potential of the spring.
It's in the stress of the crystallization that has occurred within that system.
And then you will say something like,
But that energy is still being held together. There is still energy there, and it's still moving at a microscopic level. It's still spinning centrally.
He just says the word crystallization for no reason, and then tries to bring up other forms of kinetic energy that don't have anything to do with what Eric is talking about. If you compress a spring, it has potential energy, and it is not moving. That's the point. Eric should have just said that repeatedly if necessary. By talking at great length about esoteric concepts and terminology, it's too easy for the viewer to get lost, and for Terry to then find places to hide within the jargon to pretend he knows what he's talking about. Compressed spring, no motion, potential energy. The end. Terry is wrong, And as happens repeatedly in this conversation, there is no resolution. Someone changes the subject 3 times in 10 seconds, and we are off to something else.
These two photons that were entangled, and it looks like a yin and a yang. Have you seen this?
People always want to talk about faster than light communications by taking an entangled pair and saying that if I do something in one place, I know what happens outside of my light cone. So we can give meaning to these things, and then you have to say, well, it doesn't allow you to create information transfer faster than the speed of light. You have to be very careful and precise about it. But if you just start getting jiggy, then you start thinking.
You introduce the ether.
So the ether.
This is most of the episode. Joe brings up something totally random. Eric kind of explains some aspect of it in a way that absolutely nobody listening will understand. Terry just says ether for absolutely no reason, and then Eric doesn't make fun of Terry for pretending he's not completely clueless. It's a circus sideshow.
Call that the ether. That's more or less what we work with. And then we do this weird thing where we say, well, they used to think the ether existed, and then it didn't. Ha, ha, ha. And that's not really...
No, because that's when they said that space was a vacuum, and they realized that space is not
a vacuum.
It's not a vacuum.
Yeah.
It's not a vacuum.
Do you know how much is going on in that vacuum? It's all going on.
Yes, that all of this stuff.
I understand. So this is the thing, which is if you step on this thing the wrong way, everybody laughs and says, ha, 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 he doesn't understand the Michelson-Morley experiment. He doesn't understand why there's no ether. And then we secretly sneak it back in.
Yes, we should say, ha ha ha, Terry doesn't understand the Michelson-Morley experiment. He doesn't understand that the ether has been disproven. Eric talks about what's going on in the vacuum of space, presumably referencing the zero-point energy and quantum fluctuation, which has nothing to do with the obsolete concept of the luminiferous ether, and again pretends that it somehow pertains to Terry's inability to discuss science from 150 years ago. It's an immense disservice.
In analogy to off-access digital holography, where we coincidence imaging of the superposition of an unknown state with a reference state is used to perform quantum state tomography. What the fuck?
See, but that's because of the uncertainty and Schrodinger,
Right.
all of that. But if you were able, because they started off trying to predict an electron cloud, and find a little particle inside of it and couldn't predict it, so all these uncertainties and probabilities came out. But they were doing things on a two-dimensional basis. That's what I believe that I've figured out with the wave conjugations, because they talk about they show the pieces of hyperbolic space to where you don't have to go through all these unnecessary steps to reach it.
I am just so happy that someone's doing something like this. I'm so happy that we can talk about it. I don't think most people have any understanding of what's going on at the highest levels of this kind of science.
There is only one way to contextualize all of this. People like to understand things. People also hate learning things. What you get is a bunch of people who want to understand the frontier of theoretical physics without ever having learned any physics whatsoever. So they listen to Joe Rogan read a section of an abstract, then they listen to Terry pretend to not only understand it, but to have actually innovated new physics that supersedes it, and then everybody pats themselves on the back for pretending to be interested in science. Joe is a shaman who conjures up an undeserved sense of intellectuality for the lazy common man, and frauds like Terry take advantage of it to gain a cult following. All you have to do is memorize a bunch of words and use them randomly. From his first sentence, he says uncertainty and then Schrodinger, when he's clearly pretending to know what the Heisenberg uncertainty principle states and who formulated it. He has no idea what any physicist has ever done. He has no clue what any of these principles say. He's just in love with reciting words that sound complicated to him. And someone like Eric has no business acting like a scholar when he doesn't shine a light on exactly what's going on here. If he can't get Terry to admit that 1 times 1 equals 1, what is the point of going through all of this esoterica?
It's weird to think that this little studio, in a weird way, is one of the rivals of universities when we don't know what's going on at Harvard. As you know, recently seen, we don't kick out plagiarists. We don't check what's going on at the National Institute of Health. And so it's very strange that this table is one of the last things that is trusted by many people. And that's one of the reasons I'm here, which is people have a chance to see people in conversation about things. And you screw up, but the conversation's recorded, and we all go on, and people have a chance to see what's coming out.
Yes, it is absolutely insane that people put more stock in what one delusional actor says than all of the mathematicians and scientists all over the world. That's where we are at as a society. It is complete epistemological breakdown. People would rather pretend that basic arithmetic is wrong than admit that they blindly follow charlatans. And shame on Eric for feeding into this cycle to amass his own following.
All of these things I went up to Oxford 8 years ago and tried to present them there to be examined. They didn't want to take me seriously.
Because you keep coming at it
Because
in
the
the
one
ways you
times
do it.
one, when I said the one times one, but like I said, that was a metaphor to say
There's no
something's wrong, but they know something's wrong with the math. It's not
Well,
adding
so
up.
you bring up renormalization theory.
Right.
Renormalization theory is a way of saying we know that we're working with math that's wrong. And on the other hand, we have a way of working with math that's wrong, even though we know it's wrong.
Again, Terry uses this ridiculous metaphor excuse to pretend he isn't stupid. But there's nothing wrong with the math. He just doesn't want to learn math. But people are so obsessed with the idea that math could be wrong that they just believe him when he says math is wrong. Instead of showing Terry how wrong he is, Eric rhetorically corroborates this dumb lie, and Joe buys into it hook, line, and sinker.
So in this, is there a potential future where human beings, through whatever means, develop a superior method of mathematics that doesn't have a problem with the number two, that doesn't have all these issues that we're talking about?
Well, that's what I think I've done with my wave conjugations. It solves all of those problems. That's what I can't wait to talk about.
I can barely summon the words to express how maddening this is. Joe just reasserts this idiotic script that there's something wrong with the number two just because Terry needs this problem to exist to pretend that 1 times 1 equals 2, which he continues to double down on even after pretending he was speaking metaphorically. There are so many millions of people all over the world who could crap all over this idiotic fantasy, but the only guy there is Eric, who needs to placate this delusion. So let's hear Terry pretend that wave conjugations mean something.
What Terence is going to start talking about is wave conjugations. And he has different ways that spheres run into each other. Then he says something very cryptic, where he says, if you drop in the center of a spherical lake, circularly symmetric lake, the wave will radiate out until it hits the wall, the shore, and then it will radiate back. And so he's talking about this. He says wave conjugations, and wave conjugation didn't call up anything directly when I heard him say it.
They would call it a phase conjugation.
Well, or they would talk about, the conjugate wave coming back. If you do something like a garden hose that's affixed to the wall it'll hit the wall and come back. So what Terence is talking about is the idea, and you could do this, where we could drop, like, let's say 6 stones in precise places in water, and then, using super slow-mo, watch what happens as these waves in precisely placed places run into each other. It's really what physics is waves and collision.
And they're going to create a particular cymatics, which is going to show the harmonic points where...
The important part is where Eric basically says that wave conjugations doesn't mean anything. Terry says phase conjugation because he recently had a Google party and found a tangentially related term that he wants to pretend is what he means. Then Eric describes something that has nothing to do with Terry's pretty shapes, so Terry acts like he knows what's happening and piles some more crazy on top.
And that cube will have an octahedral cavity that looks like this. That's how I think he generated this.
I actually generated this by putting 8 pieces together. I took 8 of those triangular pieces together, and I put them together. They basically became the basis of 2 tetraons.
Yeah.
Which this would be seen as a neutron. And the interesting thing about this piece right here is nature always makes things in pairs, and they're always balanced. This doesn't exist. This exists only as a result of a pressure condition, a higher pressure condition.
Just more Terry Brand word salad. This is a neutron? How is that a neutron? Does he even know what a neutron is? Why doesn't Eric ask him what the hell he means when he says that's a neutron? Higher pressure condition? Pressure of what? He has no idea what pressure means. He's saying absolutely nothing, and nobody is doing anything about it.
The problem, Terrence, is that you have a desire to go immediately towards what this means. Before you get to what it means, people don't even know what it is, right?
Eric knows that retaining a shred of credibility requires some modicum of pushback, and that's what this is. But it's just not enough. He has no interest in teaching Terry anything. He just wants to piggyback on his crazy to leech off of his cult-generating momentum.
Neil can't figure out, well, where did this come from? So what it is spheres of radius root 2, with the 8 vertices of Q, passing through each other, but closing off an octahedral cavity with positively curved triangles inside. That's what I needed. Well, just when I needed you most.
This moment encapsulates what these three men are here for. Terry is here to appear validated by someone who knows what they're talking about. Eric is here to capitalize on a meme to bolster his profile. And Joe is here for the clicks. That's all.
I think it's a foolish thing almost always to pretend there's nothing new under the sun. You should always consider it. You might not be correct, but there's only one way to find
Well,
out.
there's a difference between, you see, Terrence has much greater odds of contributing to the world of engineering than he does to the world of mathematics. I mean, the odds that he's doing something new in mathematics, I'll be blunt, are very, very small.
Even though I have patents on it that shows it all this.
I don't want to go there. The patents do not speak to what you think they speak to.
That's
Joe says it's foolish to think there's nothing new to be discovered, which of course nobody says. That's just a line people use when their objectively wrong bullshit is shown to be objectively wrong. People will continue to discover new things, and they will do so by first learning what we already know, something which takes many years and lots of hard work, and which people like Terry and Joe will never ever do. Eric says Terry will never contribute to math, and Terry brings up his patents. Surprisingly, Eric burns Terry by taking a dump on his patents. For the thousands of people on my first Terry video complaining about his patents, let's make it clear that he's totally full of crap. He doesn't have 97 patents. He has 11 design patents for children's toys and 3 patent applications, 2 of which are for jewelry. The third is the AR/VR patent he was bragging about in the other episode, and that is a rejected patent application. The official reason is abandoned failure to respond to an office action given in 2013. And the year prior, he received a non-final rejection citing errors in diagrams and imprecise language, and too much similarity to an existing patent. The citations he referred to are just IP that are related by concept and keyword. VR was invented before Terry was born, and he's never invented or innovated anything. He's just a lying fraud who is now pretending that he has patents on math, a thing you can't do.
The reason that science works as well as it does is that up until very recently, there were clear rules, cultures. We agreed to leave certain things at the door, like our religious beliefs. We agreed to submit to certain sorts of things. We were decent to each other. And that system is in a process of collapse.
Yes, it's collapsing because the general public thinks that anyone who actually studies and knows things is a corrupt government shill, while confidently clueless asshats like Terry are geniuses. It will be what destroys the human race.
Terrence is coming from a polymathic perspective. He's all over the map in terms of the quality of his thinking. It's good. As far as I understand, some of his stuff is really, really good. Some of his stuff is offensive. And it's everything in between. Now, I'm not gunning for you.
No, I don't take that offensively.
Okay.
I take it on the fact that you're here. But let's get back to what I was saying about having, if my pieces.
Of course, Eric was instead saying that Terry should be taken seriously, while in the same breath stating that some of what he says is so idiotic that it's offensive. Terry keeps the compliment and blows right past the insult by nervously steering the conversation the way he wants it to go.
But what it's showing you is where electricity is being pushed into the center, and you'll see these magnetic waves coming out,
It's showing you the magnetic field. So these predict and create a natural dodecahedron, whereas these come together and create a natural icosahedron. That's not something that just happens by accident.
No, this isn't an accident. This is what's going on, Terrence, for me.
Can you connect all these together in one big ball of fluid?
Yes, they just keep getting, because it's supersymmetry.
Yeah.
They all fit
I want
together.
to see
That's
these
what
and
I'm
these
saying.
together.
It ain't supersymmetry, but it's freaking
Right. I know what you're saying.
When Terry pretends that his shape has anything to do with a magnetic field, that's where a physicist is supposed to say, "What the hell are you talking about? Stop rambling, Terry. Magnetic field. How is this a magnetic field? Where is it? From what? How? What is a magnetic field? What causes them to exist? Do you know?" But Eric doesn't do that. He giggles to himself, knowing that Terry uses the word supersymmetric incorrectly, but that's not enough.
So he then starts to make noises about it. He says things that I don't love, which are that those spaces he associates with the electric field. And the vertices, sometimes he calls vortices, and sometimes I'm not quite sure, he associates with the magnetic field. Now, I don't have a clue why he says the next thing, which is, and because the number of magnetic and the number of electric things are balanced, they cancel out, and therefore it's the weak force. And to me, it's just like super cool stuff, and then suddenly turns into horseshit.
Well, look at that. Maybe Eric has it in him after all. Electric field, magnetic field, vertices, vortices. It's all horseshit. Any thoughts, Terry?
But listen, why? Here we have this, those two tetraons on the end. They both have equal poles, 4 electric poles and 4 magnetic poles, according to how I see it. That where magnetism is spinning off of the tips, the vortices, because it's no longer able to maintain that center space of spinning centricity.
I don't know what the hell
So what brought you to that conclusion?
A normal person in Terry's shoes would admit that they aren't saying anything, but Terry is not a normal person. This time, Joe doesn't want to let him off the hook as easily as he normally does, but it doesn't go anywhere. Terry just spews sentence after sentence of completely meaningless tripe that isn't even worth listening to, and he isn't held sufficiently accountable for it. Eric sometimes point blank tells Terry he's wrong, but then he just talks about something esoteric instead of helping the viewer see how wrong he is. Here's an example.
It's actually the case that electromagnetism, the weak force and strong force, are a different form of curvature, which might be called Arrhenius curvature or fiber bundle curvature, which is not necessarily Riemannian intrinsic curvature. This object encodes the curvature, it encodes electromagnetism as the components of curvature. To your point, nothing is a straight line.
But this is where I have issues. You're talking about this is in Cartesian space. And in Cartesian space, curvature is not allowed.
Mm-mm.
There's no curvature that's allowed in Cartesian space.
That's
So
wrong.
And
Because what you have, and by the way, it's a super subtle thing. We've only really known this for 50 years.
No, it's not a super subtle thing that we've only known for 50 years. No curvature allowed in Cartesian space? What about all the curves we learned about in middle school? The conic sections, parabolas, hyperbolas, circles, ellipses, spheres, all kinds of other three-dimensional shapes. I didn't play the whole clip of what Eric was explaining because it's long and irrelevant, but Terry had no idea what Eric was talking about, jumped in and said the word Cartesian to sound intelligent, and then said something insanely stupid. The correct response is, why the hell are you saying there is no curvature in Cartesian space, and why would you say something so insanely stupid? Eric says he's wrong, but he calls the distinction subtle because he's leaving room for Terry to wiggle away unscathed. He wants to ramble about something esoteric to sound intelligent when he should be explaining middle school level math for Terry, for Joe, for the listeners, because that's what they need to learn. They have no ability to understand the complicated things he's talking about. They need to learn the basics.
on a simple level, how would you describe electricity?
put it simply. Electromagnetism is really about rock, paper, scissors.
No, Eric, you had Terry on his back, knowing that he can't comment on anything you're saying, and he managed to ask a simple question, requesting a simple answer. Instead of using some abstract analogy to seem thoughtful and accessible, just answer the question. Electricity is a flow of particles possessing electric charge. That's it. Electrons are negatively charged particles, and they flow along a metal wire to your outlets to provide electrical energy. Just teach basic physics. Don't ramble for several minutes about optical illusions. When you keep things unintelligible and abstract, Terry feels emboldened to do this too, and that's where he likes to hide so that people can't see how dumb he is.
Predict every harmonic note, every wave function. It will continue on. They overlap on each other to where any size, any crystalline configuration that somebody could hope for occurs. This is the supersymmetry that I'm talking about that defines the entire wave field. This is one part of, this is the crystalline electric wave field. That's not even, that's just one.
How cool is this? The problem that you're in right now.
He doesn't know what a wave function is. He doesn't know what supersymmetry means. These shapes don't predict anything. He's not doing anything. He's not doing anything.
The space made of spheres and platonic solids, whatever. You could spend your entire life, and I've seen people do it, staring into this and just finding cool thing after cool thing, thinking that you're seeing Jesus. I promise you.
He's being rightfully dismissive, but he's not actually holding Terry accountable for anything he's saying. There are moments where he talks down to him, but they're too few and far between, and they don't stick for the viewer.
But if light passing through these show the same cymatics that we look at when we're looking at natural occurrences of individual frequencies, doesn't that become its own secondary proof beyond the symmetry of what it does?
You say geometry is a proof, and one of the things is you are at your weakest when you have an equal sign. No, you're your strongest geometrically. You're at your weakest when you have an equal sign. You say the dumbest stuff, and you say the coolest stuff about geometry. And I wonder whether you mean something.
It's funny that they both criticize Neil's response to Terry when Eric is kind of doing the same thing as Neil. Telling Terry he's at his strongest with geometry is basically just saying that he made up some pretty shapes. That's what Neil said. Everything else is garbage, which is what Eric is more or less saying here too. But then we get back to the bad math.
Yep, hit 2, square root, it'll be over one more. I think that may be it. Yeah.
It's the fucking future, man.
If I share my location, I be where check at. I say, girl, I'm high grade. That other nigga mid, cause she know what it is.
Finesse 2 times.
Sliding on this fucking chair, man. Ugh. Not bad, not bad. Hot scraper. Holy moly.